Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to Lunch and Learn. We are glad to have Lauren, who is the Wild Birds Unlimited Education Director. So we're glad to have her here. She's going to give us some advice. And we really do need some with our trees being gone. So that means a lot of the habitat is gone, the food's gone. How are we going to be able to help our animals, our birds mainly, to survive this winter until we can get things up and going again? So we're so glad you're here, Lauren, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you for coming so much.
Thank you for having me. Can everybody hear me okay? Perfect, awesome. I just turned the microphone back on. My name is Lauren Eno. I'm the Education Director for Wild Birds Unlimited, both in our Fayetteville as well as our Rogers location. And our mission is to connect people with nature and do it with excellence. So what that means is, in addition to being a retail location that sells bird feeders and high quality bird seed that's chosen for our local birds, we also try and get out and talk to the community as much as we can. Because how can we protect something if we don't care about it and if we don't know how to protect it? So I want to thank you all for coming out today. And so to begin, how many of you already feed birds at home? Cool, most of us, that's awesome. So what are some of the reasons that we feed the birds? Here's what I do. You like to watch them? Yeah. Yeah, birds are awesome for kind of being our little feathered friends every day. You know, they're pretty reliable. You know, we also feed the birds, kind of help them out, and you know, we've seen a lot this spring moving into this fall. And this winter, the birds might need our help more than they have in years. So we're going to talk about some of the ways that you can get your yard and your bird feeding station ready for the birds, whether you have a bird feeding station already, whether you feed the birds, or whether you just want to be able to offer them other things that can help them survive this winter. Just like us, our birds need several things in order to survive. They need food, water, shelter, space, and they need to be able to pass on their genes to the next generation, obviously. So the last one isn't quite as important in the winter time because none of our local birds nest during the winter, but the others become very important during the winter. So let's start off with food. So just like us, you know, the birds eat a lot of their calories from fat, protein, and fiber, as well as fat, protein, fiber, and I totally just blanked on the last one. Blooper reel. Water's the second one. So fat and protein are going to be the two big ones that we're going to be talking about today. The third one, I just remembered, they need a lot of calcium as well, but that's usually during the nesting season. So during the winter time, a bird can lose 80% of its body fat in just one night. So the birds don't have a lot of fat on them to begin with. They can't fatten up like a bear can, because then they wouldn't be able to fly. So they have to stay really, really lean every day. And that means every single morning, as soon as they wake up, they need food. They need food that's really high in fat in particular. So that's why a lot of people like to feed suet in the wintertime. So a lot of you have probably seen these cage-style suet feeders, either attached to another feeder like this or on their own. So the suet is really good. Peanuts are also a really, really awesome source of food for the birds. Now, if you want to do even more for them, if you have any native plants that you can plant in your yard, especially things with nuts or with fruit can be really helpful for them. As well as October is National Leave the Leaves Month. What that means is we're encouraging everyone to leave your leaves on your ground. Don't get rid of them because in addition to making awesome free mulch for your yard, it also helps keep the nutrients in the ground, which keeps your yard healthier. It makes your grass lusher the next year, and also it helps support all of those overwintering insects that are just the perfect little powerhouse of food for those birds. That also includes leaving your plants, if you have any that you have flowers on, don't deadhead them yet. Let them stay up through the winter because a lot of insects will overwinter in the stalks of those plants. And the birds throughout the winter, they'll be looking for the seeds of those as well. So if you have any native plants in your yard, go ahead and leave it as it is because that will give your birds that boost Also, I know some of us probably still have some brush piles and stuff left over from the storms. Leave those for the winter. We're gonna talk about that later on, but that's part of shelter for them. So the best thing you can do is leave some of that stuff. And if anybody argues with you, say, look at me, I'm saving nature, what are you doing? So the next thing that everybody needs to survive is water. Now, when the temperature is, in like the 40s or 50s, then if your birds have any water in the area, they'll probably be all right. But once the temperatures drop below freezing, it becomes a lot harder for them to keep that water in their system. I was telling some of us, like the birds can eat snow, but it takes a lot of energy, and so they have to eat even more for that. One of the coolest things you can do is, in the past few years, they have released bird bath heaters and heated bird baths. So that way your birds can come in and they'll know they always have an open source of water. I will say none of those are solar powered yet. I've been looking, I wish they were. They're all, so far, plug-in ones. So if you have an outdoor plug, one of the simplest things you can do to help the birds in the winter is to supply that bird bath and keep it clean and fresh, and the birds will be flocking, especially on those colder days. The third thing is shelter. So I already mentioned the brush piles, especially your little birds like your sparrows, your juncos, your finches, chickadees, titmice, nuthatches. They're all looking for a really, really tight spot that they can fly into. If there's a predator nearby, and especially with so many trees being gone, it's going to be a lot easier for hawks to see what's going on in the area. So having those brush piles gives those birds a nice safe spot to fly into. I usually recommend like 15 to 20 feet from your bird feeders. If you have a brush pile there, that's going to give them a nice safe place to go. And then of course also during the night it gets really cold. And so if you have a bird box, like a nest box already in your property, that's awesome. Make sure it's nice and cleaned out now. And the birds will go in there in the wintertime, especially the bluebirds will sometimes go in pretty decent numbers, and they'll all snuggle in together and form a little cuddle to keep them warm on those cold winter nights. There's also a type of box called a roosting box that you can get. And you know how most bird houses have the hole at the very top of the house? The roosting boxes are unique in that the hole is in the bottom, and that's because heat rises. So think about it, if you were going to be staying in your house in the wintertime, and you left all your windows on your second floor open, all that heat's going to escape right away. So by just keeping the bottom open, that gives the birds a lot more comfort. Those houses also tend to have large perches on the inside to fit multiple birds as well. So even if you can't commit to having a birdhouse during the nesting season, a roosting box in the winter is a really great way to supply them that extra space. Plus, it'll also encourage them to stay closer to your feeders and your water, and so you can enjoy them more. So we have food, water, shelter, and then with space, I feel like that's one that unfortunately we probably have a lot more of now, but that can also mean space around your feeders. To get the widest variety and the largest number of birds, the best thing you can do is have multiple feeding and water stations around your yard. That's because, some birds tend to be kind of bullies. Like, for instance, you have the mockingbirds that can be kind of bullies sometimes, starlings, grackles, blackbirds, and any of you that remember a few winters ago when we're feeding the birds, you might have even noticed your robins were being kind of bullies towards some of the other birds. And that's because, they feel like they're in a life and death situation. So by supplying lots of different styles of feeders, so I brought with me today a copy of our hobby guide. And one of my favorite pages in this whole thing is the 12 elements of a thoughtful bird feeding station. And I'll go ahead and pass that around to y'all. But this will give you some ideas about all the different types of feeders and places that you can put them. So I recommend in the wintertime having several foundational feeders. This is going to be a feeder like this that has a large supply of seed. You want to be able to feed 80% of your seed-eating birds in one place, and you want to have enough food for several days, even in bad weather conditions. So think about it. If we get a snowstorm that makes it hard to get out and fill your feeders for a few days, you want to make sure that you're going to have plenty of food for them. And the best seed blends you can get for this part of the country are blends that are high in sunflowers and peanuts. Those are going to have all that fat and protein that the birds need on those cold winter days. In addition to that, there's also, they've made little suet nuggets now called bark butter bits, and those are awesome. I always mix those in with my food in the wintertime to give them that extra punch of power. So you're going to see everything from, your finches and your chickadees visiting it to woodpeckers and just about everybody. So you'll notice if you ever go to Wild Birds Unlimited that most of our seed blends focus primarily on sunflowers and peanuts for that reason. Another style of feeder would be a tray style feeder. So like if you were to, if you were to take the lid off of this guy and take the sides out, there we go. You have a nice open tray for the birds. And what this is really good for is this is like a charcuterie board for the birds. I like to put this out anytime the seasons are changing. And you just put a little bit of everything on there. So maybe a pile of peanuts, pile of sunflowers, some suet, mealworms for your bluebirds. This is a really great way to see what everybody's eating at any given time of the year. So, you might notice right now that your birds aren't eating a lot of suet, but maybe they're eating a lot more peanuts. And a month from now, when it gets colder, that might change. So it's a really great way to kind of keep on track with it. Plus, a lot of birds feel more comfortable in a tray-style feeder, especially the birds that like to have more space for perching. So birds like your cardinals, your doves, your sparrows and juncos, especially if you have a really nice size tray, like bigger than this, and a lot of those birds really like it closer to the ground, just above the height of the snow or the ground itself. It's going to give those birds a wider variety of space. Plus, you'll notice with this has a weather guard on top. So this little roof helps keep rain and snow out because that can both, make the seed kind of gross and fall apart faster, but then it can also spread diseases if your seed gets wet. So having some sort of weather guard over your feeders will help keep your birds happier and healthier through the winter. Another option would be like a finch feeder that's specifically for your goldfinches. So anybody that's ever had goldfinches visit their yard before knows that they tend to come in pretty decent numbers. And so a finch feeder would be similar to this tube right here, but the holes are smaller and there tends to be more perches on the feeder. You might have also seen some that look like a thin mesh tube. And goldfinches, they're like us, they like to hang out with their friends. And so for them, we usually feed really, really tiny seeds, like very, very finely ground sunflower. Or there's a black seed called Niger, which is similar to the thistles that we have here in North America. And those seeds provide a lot of fat and protein for the birds as well. So if you have a finch feeder up, especially, probably not as much this year, but like last year, I don't know if anybody saw, we had a bunch of those pine siskins. The little brown and yellow streaky birds that hang out with the goldfinches. And we had them visiting in large numbers. And so by providing a lot of feeders for those guys too, you're helping them survive through the winter. We also have the fat feeder, so that's like the suet feeder that I mentioned over here. There's also a type of suet feeder that has a kind of U-shaped base, and that's called a tail prop. And in particular, if you want to get all of your woodpeckers happy and coming back a lot, that tail prop acts as an anchor for them for their tails. And so that makes them feel a lot more comfortable at your feeder. I like to compare it to like if you go out to eat and they offer you a metal stool versus a booth. Where are you going to want to visit more? Assuming everything else is exactly the same. So that's a really great way to get the woodpeckers to come. There's even some that are like this big so that even your pileated woodpeckers can visit. And so it's like just keep those filled as much as possible during the winter time. There's also, pretty soon, the winter suets will be coming out. Right now, we're still easing out of our summer suets, but the winter suets have a much higher fat content. In particular, there's one called Super Suet that we have at Wild Birds Unlimited that has a higher fat content than any other suet on the market. And what makes the Super Suet unique is it's the only suet on the market that has a winter suet that is hot pepper. So you'll notice all the other hot pepper suets you see anywhere, they say no melt on them. They're designed for the summertime feeding, so they have a lot more nuts in them to kind of help hold that shape so they don't melt in the sun. So keep your eyes open for a full-fat hot pepper suet to help keep those squirrels and raccoons away. Then, let's see here. Something else that you can offer in the winter time, especially for your insect-eating birds, are going to be mealworms. And even though they tend to be a lot more of like a spring and summer food, especially if you want to get more bluebirds in or more robins, mealworms are a really awesome thing to feed. You can either mix them in with your loose seed, or you can put them out in a cute little feeder like this. This feeder was designed to be especially attractive to bluebirds because it is the color blue, and that seems to be their favorite color that they come to. It's also got, a nice small dish, so you're not filling it up with all your mealworms all at once. And it has drainage holes in the bottom, so that even if some rain does get in, it'll be able to kind of drain right out. That being said, definitely recommend this with one of those weather guards as well. I also brought with me some feathers, because even right now, even before the winter comes, we can help the birds grow the strongest, healthiest feathers possible. And the protein in your food loads that you're feeding now will help provide the structure of the feathers, and the fat that you're feeding right now will help provide the color in these feathers. So next spring, when you see a really colorful cardinal at your feeder, you know you did it well this fall. And the feathers, of course, in addition to helping the bird fly, the downy part also keeps them nice and warm, and the feathers also keep the bird waterproof, so that helps them survive as well. So for everyone who's feeding birds right now, thank you so much for helping them get ready for the winter. A few other things that I have with me here. This book right here is my absolute favorite. This is The Joy of Bird Feeding by Jim Carpenter. This book is required reading for our staff at the store because it has all the information you could ever want, including about being seasonally savvy throughout the seasons. So it talks in more detail than that hobby guide about all the different information that you could be looking for. It talks a lot about critter solutions. It also talks about such fun things as one of my favorite winter bird activities, teaching the birds to eat out of the palm of your hand. And if that's something y'all want to get into, it's really simple. So the first thing that you can do is, just make sure you're feeding the birds already in your yard. Even right now when it's slower, the birds are looking for a spot for the winter time. They're scoping out where the best sources of food are going to be. So if you want the birds to come to your yard, that's the perfect way to get started with it right now. As it gets cooler, what you can do is start taking away a couple of those bird feeders if you want to feed them out of your hands. And like for me, I put a lawn chair where the feeder usually is, and I put some seed on that lawn chair. And the birds start visiting that as a tray-style feeder. And then the next thing I do is I make a little dummy out of my clothes. Like I put like my winter coat on it, my gloves, a hat over the top, and I hold it out and I put some seed in the palm of that hand. And then over time, as the birds start to trust that, then all you have to do is take out all the stuff from your little dummy and put yourself in there instead. And so that can be a really fun way to feed the winter birds, especially like chickadees are really well known for that, nuthatches, titmice, even like their little downy woodpeckers might come and eat out of your hands. And that's just a really great way to kind of connect with them during the winter months. And that brings me to our next topic. I just thought of it because, if the birds are on you, birds are kind of messy. And that is how to keep your feeders clean, because unfortunately winter is the worst time for a lot of the birds when it comes to diseases. In particular, the finches have a disease that they can get, it's called finch eye disease. And it's basically like pink eye for finches. Now for us, as humans, we're able to get through that kind of thing fairly easily, if not without a lot of discomfort. But for birds that rely on their eyes all the time, if their eyes swell shut, it makes it really hard for them to live their lives. There's also like salmonella, and a bunch of other kind of smaller diseases that pass around, as well as just, mold makes you sick too. So when you're cleaning your bird feeders, I usually recommend giving them a good clean about once a month or so. And what you do is you bring the feeder inside. I like to take a scrubby brush to it and just get all of that loose gunk off first. Make sure your feeder comes apart nice and easily. You'll notice all of our feeders are really easy to take apart and clean. And then once you have all that kind of junk off, I use just a little bit of Dawn dish soap, which is the brand that is the best suited for wildlife. You know, that's why they use it with oil spills and everything. So a little bit of Dawn dish soap and water. I just scrub it out until it looks like all the junk is off of it. Then I give it a really good rinse, and I do a 10% bleach solution. So, 1 part bleach to 9 parts water. And I dump the feeder in there for a couple minutes. I take it out. I give it another really, really, really thorough rinse to make sure there's no bleach, no soap, nothing left on the feeder. And then I let it dry completely before putting it outside. Now, if you do happen to see a bird that looks sick, like if you notice a bird with its eyes kind of swelled shut, or if it just looks puffier than it should, or if it just seems kind of lethargic, the best thing you can do is immediately take all your feeders down and clean them. That way you're not spreading any disease. And then in particular, if you see finches getting sick, this is one of the few times I'll actually recommend you leave some of your feeders down. I usually switch over to just suet if I even think there's a chance that my bird is sick, just for a week or so, and that gives them a chance to spread out. So finches don't really eat suet. So that's why I leave that out. If I were to notice it during the summer, I would leave my hummingbird feeders out too, because they leave that alone. But finches are really, really bad at social distancing, guys. I don't know if y'all have noticed that. So by encouraging them to go elsewhere to spread out, that gives them a better chance of survival. And then, once it's been a week or so, it's okay to put those feeders back up, because by then it should have spread out enough that you shouldn't have any more sick birds. But it's just always a good idea to keep your eyes on it. And then, if you want to, you can always clean your feeders more often. I only dip mine, once a month. But if I notice that the feeder is starting to get a little bit grosser looking, I might clean it more often. Also, I'm going to recommend for feeders that you have out during the winter time, I really prefer feeders that are made out of some sort of plastic or metal or even glass over wooden feeders, because the wooden feeders soak up that moisture so much more. It's a lot harder to keep them clean. It's a lot harder to dip them in the bleach. So I like to use that more for drier season feeding. And in particular, any that are made out of this material, this poly lumber, are really great because, well, for one, they're made out of recycled milk jugs, so they really help the environment. But in addition to that, this material is super sturdy, it's super easy to clean, and it'll last you, 10 years or more potentially without cracking or fading. So it makes it really easy. Like, this just takes a quick wipe down versus something that you have to really, really get in and scrub like an old wooden feeder. And this is one of the ways that we're starting to kind of change not just the foods that we're feeding, but how we're presenting them to the birds to make it easier on us and to make it easier on the birds as well. Something else I want to mention is, again, we talked about weather guards earlier. Another great way to keep that seed from getting wet and to keep it from getting moldy or from spreading disease more easily is there's a product called Feeder Fresh. And it's like those little silica gel packets, basically, that you would get in like your shoes and such, except for it is a bird-friendly, environmentally friendly form of it. And you just pour like a couple tablespoons of that in your bird feeder, and it wicks the moisture away. It's amazing. It not only keeps your seed from clumping, but it also keeps all that residue and buildup from building on the inside of your feeders as well. So it's a really awesome way to keep your feeders clean and your birds happy. I especially love it in my finch feeder because my finch feeder has such tiny, tiny holes that if even a drop of water can get into it, then it can really mess it up. And the Feeder Fresh is super easy too because you can tell when it's absorbed all the moisture it's going to because it goes from kind of a white color to a clear color. So that makes it really easy to tell when to switch it out. And I'll either put a layer at the bottom or I mix it in with my regular seeds to get it more mixed through. It really depends on the feeder. So I know I've talked a lot so far. Before I move into kind of some of those more critter solutions and such, I wanted to check in and see if anybody had any questions about anything we talked about so far. Yeah?
So if I know that I have wet bird seed, should I get rid of it?
So it depends on how long it's been wet. If it's just barely gotten wet, what I've done in the past is I've put it out on a cookie tray with some of that Feeder Fresh to just soak it up right away. If it's been there for a couple days, especially with finch food, it's not gonna be the healthiest for the birds. And two, the birds can tell when things are starting to get moldy even before we can, so they'll tend to leave your food alone. So you wanna keep your food as fresh as possible. But if it's just happened, you might be able to save it with Feeder Fresh. It's kind of like throwing your phone in a bowl of rice if it gets wet. Did that answer your question? What other questions does everybody have so far?
I want to say that could we put acorns in our bird feeders for the bluejays to others?
Yeah, if you have acorns in your yard, you can definitely, especially if you do like a tray style like this. What I'll do sometimes is I will put them in like a little pillowcase or a sock, and I'll have an adult help me, and I'll grab a hammer, and the adult will just smash the acorns a little bit. That breaks the shell a little bit, and so that can help. And right now, a lot of the birds would normally be eating a lot of nuts if we had a lot of trees with nuts in our yards. So if you have some, then your birds will go crazy for them.
Like, you can put in your bird feeder because they said that the birds can't find the acorns. They just have it ready.
Yeah, having it right and ready to go for them. And that makes it a lot more convenient for the birds as well. So I like your thinking. So what other questions do people have about food, water, or shelter for the birds? And at this point, anytime you all want to interject with a question, feel free. I know I oftentimes get sidetracked with lots of questions in my own mind, and I know other people are the same way. So even if I'm not clear, be like, hey, can you explain that a little bit more? So then the next thing we have are critter solutions. I know that while we were kind of gathering in and everything, we talked a little bit about one of my favorite critter solutions, and that is to combat raccoons, squirrels, mice, even like bears and deer don't tend to like hot pepper. And just to give you all an idea, usually if you find a hot pepper bird food on the market, it's going to be about as hot as a habanero. So not hot enough that it's going to cause any serious damage to the animals. Just like if we were to eat something spicy and we weren't expecting it, it would make them uncomfortable. But it doesn't have any sort of long-term damage to the animals at all. And in addition to that, the birds, there's some studies that are starting to come out that suggest that birds such as bluebirds and cardinals might actually prefer the other flavors in the hot pepper to seed that doesn't have any heat in it at all. So, and that's because the hot pepper is a fruit. And bluebirds and cardinals are well known for eating some fruit in their diet. So it's a great way to kind of encourage them as well. I know in my own yard, a couple summers ago, I grew some hot pepper plants. And one day, I was just sitting in my window watching my birds, and I saw a cardinal hop up to my hot pepper plant, and he picked one. And then he fed it to his lady friend, and it was so cute. So and there are, as I told some of y'all, there are some pepper plants down in the south that are called bird peppers. And they haven't just been shown to be food for the birds, but the birds actually really, really like them. And they give them a lot of the vitamins and minerals that they need. So hot pepper is totally bird safe. And it even has been shown that it doesn't like affect their eyes or anything either. So even though if we got hot pepper in our eyes, it would burn. The birds don't have the receptors in their body to have that affect them. Their body doesn't say, oh, this should be hot. It's just like, okay, this is fine. You know, it would just, if anything, it would be like if we got like a drop of like olive oil in our eye. So, not, you know, nothing that's going to be harmful in the long term, or even in the short term. The birds are really, really adaptive to that. So that's really cool. Another thing you can use to keep squirrels and raccoons away is there's a white seed called safflower. I love safflower. It is, you know, we use safflower oil in a lot of our cooking, but the birds absolutely adore it. I've got finches, chickadees, titmice, and of course the cardinals, because safflower is the cardinal's favorite food. In addition to that, it's bitter, so the squirrels leave it alone, and blackbirds, starlings, and grackles, you know, kind of those big bully blackbirds that like to come in large numbers and eat all your bird food, they have trouble cracking that shell open, so they leave it alone too. So it makes it really great. There's a reason to call it the problem solver. In addition to that, if you really want to keep squirrels and raccoons away and have a nice open area where your bird feeding station is set, like at least 10 feet from anything above or from the side. And if your bird feeders are at least 5 feet off the ground, you can get a squirrel or raccoon baffle, which I mentioned earlier with the raccoons, to keep them away. Now a squirrel can jump 5 feet straight up, you can jump 10 feet sideways, and you're not going to believe this, but it can fall from literally any height without harming itself. Any of us that have ever seen a squirrel launch itself off a second-story deck have probably know that. But so, you know, if you have a tree 20 feet up and your bird feeding station's right underneath it, that squirrel can still jump down and reach it. So, you know, there's one benefit to having a yard that maybe doesn't have as many trees as it used to, and it's easier to find a squirrel-proof spot for your bird feeding station. There's also something that I would love to do if I ever get a yard that doesn't have a giant redbud tree covering everything, is I want to get a bird feeding station that comes up to about that 5 feet, has a baffle, and then above that, they have an attachment for your pole system that you can actually stick branches into. And so if you have several of those, that turns your bird feeding station kind of into a tree. It's super fun. I've done it just to give the birds more shelter in my yard in the past. I had to keep it, you know, below squirrel height. But especially if y'all have any Christmas trees or anything this winter, you can take those branches, if it's a natural tree, cut them off and put them on there, and that gives your birds a nice safe spot to hang out. It also, you can hang feeders from it. This winter, I'm planning on doing strings of cranberries on mine to give it a nice little festive touch. Plus that helps bring in like your robins and your cedar waxwings and a lot of those winter birds that really, really love a lot of fruit. So that's another great way that you can feed the birds in the winter time. But again, you know, if you wanted to keep the squirrels away, just put it above the baffle. So we talked about baffles. Something else you can try, this will work sometimes against squirrels, deer, even like cats in your neighborhood that might come up and harass your bird feeders. When the temperatures are above freezing, you can set up like a motion activated sprinkler. And nobody likes getting soaking wet. So you can also even do like, if you have cats in your neighborhood, you can put up like a little fence around your feeder. You know, it only has to be like this high off the ground. And that can help, you know, if the cat has to jump over the fence, that gives the birds a few moments of warning to go find that shelter. Did y'all know that a cat, or well, not one cat, cats in the U.S. kill about 2.4 billion birds every year? So one of the best things that you can do is, well, for your bird's health as well as your cat's health, is if you have any cats, you can keep them inside. Especially this winter when they're going to be relying on our bird feeders more than ever. It's a good idea to just keep your eyes out on your cats. And even, especially a well-fed cat, is really good at hunting birds. And they don't necessarily do it because they're hungry. It's all based on their instincts. So that's another thing you can do. Talk about squirrels, raccoons, blackbirds. In the winter time, thank goodness, insects don't tend to be as much of a problem in your bird food. But it's still a good idea to make sure that you're storing your food in a tightly closed container in a cooler area. So whether that's in your garage or in a shed, that'll make it a lot easier to keep your food safe and healthy. And I like to use metal containers to help keep like rats and mice and stuff from getting to it. Yeah?
We can put our garbage cans in our garage because it will attract raccoons, you see, and so the concerns can't eat them. We can make them get sick more easier by that diseases and bacteria.
Yeah, so definitely like, that's like another reason why I really like metal containers. Especially, we have some at the shop that have handles on the sides as well as in the middle. And what I've even done with that is I've taken a chain through it and I've hooked the chain onto one side of the bucket. I've gone through the handle and then hooked it in on the other side. And then I'll even do that with my hot pepper food. And the hot pepper, you know, the smell of it after the first time, you know, especially the raccoons tend to learn that if they smell that, it's not something to mess with. And then, you know, if you are storing your bird food in your garage, it's a good idea to just make sure your garage door is closed, especially at night. Did that answer your question? And always let me know if you have any more, of course.
So I have cats
Mm-hmm.
that are mine.
Mm-hmm.
Can birds be trained, like if I keep my cats in the morning when the birds feed, then I can let them out, will birds know? If I do that, continue, no, probably
Not necessarily, especially if there's other cats in the neighborhood too.
I think I have the only ones.
It's something you can do, and it's something that I've taught my cat, my roommate has taught her cat to do, is to harness train them. And the first couple times they lay on the ground, they're like, no, I don't want to do this. But they learn pretty quickly, and so that can really help out a lot. And then also, if you have a cat that's outside already, there are some collars that you can get that you can go around their necks. We don't usually sell them at the shop simply because it gives some people that don't already let their cats out a reason to let their cats out. It does reduce the mortality, but it doesn't completely
Like put a bell on it or something.
yeah. So that could reduce it if your cat's already going outside.
Yeah, they were wild, so.
Yeah, I had my family's last cat was a cat that was outside for the first 4 years of her life. So yeah, and she was an outdoor cat until the end. So I hear you on that one.
Well, but fence is good.
Yeah, a fence, that's, if you have cats that are outside, a fence
Yes,
will give them that extra space. And then for that, you will probably want to have more, over the next few years, get some native plants that will grow a little bit taller, like taller bushes that maybe are at least like a foot or two off the ground from the base, and that'll give the birds somewhere to fly to if the cat does get in there. So, I love cats.
yeah.
Oh, speaking of that, at Wild Birds Unlimited, we have a program where we are fostering cats, like strays or cats that were kittens from feral cats, and we're helping them find good homes. So since March, we have gotten over 30 cats off the streets and into people's homes, and that means we've saved about 1,500 bird lives. So if any of you are looking for a really sweet indoor cat, we're going to be doing an adoption event Thursday through Saturday in both locations. Fayetteville right now has a couple of really cute kittens. And then in Rogers, we have an absolutely amazingly well-tempered tuxedo boy named Chandler that's a stat favorite. So if you're looking for a really sweet cat to sit on the couch with you and watch birds, I can tell you we have some really great ones. And then, so we talked a little bit about shelter against hawks as well. Trying to think, what other pests are people concerned about moving into the wintertime with their birds?
What about owls?
Yeah, owls and foxes, is that what I heard?
Well, I don't know about foxes, but, I hear owls coming in,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't ever come in to feed or anything. And
Yeah.
I don't know that there's anything to do for them or sort of keep them away.
So the good news with owls is they tend to eat more rodents than birds. Especially like if you were to look at owl pellets, you find that like 90% of them are more going to be rodent based. So they're less of a problem to your feeder birds than like hawks are, for example, and that's because most of our birds, especially the ones that are here during the winter time, go and hide. They take shelter at night versus the rodents and stuff, which tend to be out a little bit more during that time. If you want to help the owls, because the owls are awesome pest control, the owls actually nest. They start laying their eggs in like the winter. So there are owl boxes you can get if you have a lot of trees on your property. You can put an owl box up in one of the trees and that'll help them out. And then, so that would be what I would recommend for owls. And did you say foxes? No, I was talking about the possum. Oh, the possum, yeah. So opossums, in terms of bird food, they tend to avoid the hot pepper. Although just like with the squirrels and raccoons and us, I told some of y'all, they can develop a resistance to it. So, I know the first time I tried something spicy, I hated it. Just like, no, don't give me any spice again. And now I'm like, yeah, I want my green curry, spicy vibe, like as hot as it can get. So just like us, they can kind of gain that tolerance. And sometimes what you can do with that is just like take your feeders and just put regular food in there for like a day, and then, or well, probably a few days, and then switch back to the hot pepper and make it even hotter. And that's where the new Disco Inferno blend at Wild Birds Unlimited goes. Disco Inferno, and it's great. If you look at the packaging, it's like a couple of squirrels like doing disco moves, and it's like a disco ball. It's great, and it's twice as hot as any of the other hot pepper foods that we have. Now, if you already have your own bird food, or you want to give it a shot and mix it itself, there's a product called Kohl's Flamin' Hot Squirrel Sauce, and it's great. It comes in, I think, a 16-ounce bottle, and that's enough to treat 60 pounds of birdseed. So you only need 3 tablespoons for every 5 pounds of seed. And I remember the first time I fed hot pepper to a squirrel. So he came up, I had, my 2 feet are like this, and he came up to it, and he shoved his little face in there, little pig that he was. He took a bite, and he sat there, and he thought about it. And he thought about it. And then he did a backflip and ran away. And now, from that day forward, every time a squirrel comes up to my feeders, they sniff it. They're like, oh, nope, don't like that, and they leave before they have a chance to eat it. So with that as well, with opossums and a lot of other, kind of those nocturnal mammals that maybe aren't so good at climbing, something you can just make sure of is that you use feeders where the seed is going to stay up high, and so that the least of it will fall on the ground. And if you are putting seed closer to the ground, what you can do for that is only supply the amount of food that the birds are going to eat that day. Because the more seed that's on the ground, the more it's likely to attract those nighttime curious visitors, especially, possums, skunks, animals like that. So that would be my recommendation on that. And then I also mentioned to you, I don't know how many other people were here, I know, not at Wild Birds Unlimited, but at other locations, there's like a predator spray that you can get. And it smells, I think it smells like fox urine or something. But if it smells like somebody who wants to eat you is right nearby, you're probably going to avoid it for a while. And then finally, there's those plugins that make that really high-pitched sound. And so a lot of mammals don't tend to like that. Now, I will say, if you have any neighbors that like to walk your dogs or walk their dogs in the neighborhood, you might not want to have that. You might not want to have that on because you might make a few enemies. So it's really a better solution, like if you're out in the middle of nowhere, which is why it wasn't the first one that I immediately mentioned. What other critters? Cool. If y'all think of any, let me know. So just to kind of finish up on it, I mentioned native plants earlier in the talk, and so there's not too many that you'll be able to plant this fall anymore for moving into the winter, but come next spring, the best things you can be looking for are going to be plants that will have nuts or seeds or berries that will last through the winter. In particular, I noticed that a lot of times, like the dogwood will keep its berries over the winter time really well. If you like your own fruit, persimmons are really nice. Pawpaws are a great native fruit that you can feed that'll feed the birds and a bunch of other animals as well. I really like in the late summer to have the cardinal flower. For those of you that don't know what that looks like, it's a lobelia-looking flower, so it has these really cool, like long flowers, and it's bright red in color, and it looks super pretty, and it grows really well in wet areas. And that's a favorite food of the southward migrating hummingbirds. And in particular, I want to mention hummingbirds right now, because even though, how many of you have seen a ruby-throated hummingbird in the past week? You saw a hummingbird? How long ago was that? 2 weeks ago? So most of our ruby-throated hummingbirds are gone, but we can help out other hummingbirds this time of year. So there's another species of hummingbird called the rufous hummingbird that spends its summers in like the Pacific coast, and then there's a few of them that spend their winters on the Gulf Coast. And as they're traveling through, they oftentimes won't get here until October or November if we're going to see them at all. And usually every year we get about a half dozen sightings of them in Northwest Arkansas. So if y'all have hummingbird feeders and you want a chance to see a rare hummingbird, go ahead and leave your hummingbird feeders out. Leaving them out won't cause the hummingbirds to stay any longer. It's not like they're going to be like, oh, well, there's food, I'm just going to spend the winter here. they travel based on the day-night cycles rather than food availability. So there's no harm in leaving your hummingbird feeders out as long as you're making sure that you're keeping your nectar and they're nice and fresh. So right now, with the temperatures being like 80 degrees during the day, you'll probably want to change your nectar out every 2 to 3 days, unless you have something called Nectar Defender, which will keep it safe and fresh for up to 2 weeks. I see Mary here nodding her head. I love it. It's just like a capful of it for every cup of nectar, and it makes it so much easier. It keeps your hummingbirds from getting sick. It keeps your nectar from getting cloudy. It's a win. So there are some times when, there will be those really late hummingbirds after all of our flowers are gone. So by putting the feeder out, you can help them too. And then you can get the bragging rights of seeing a rare hummingbird that almost nobody gets to see here in Arkansas. That's another really fun way that you can help them out. So other native plants, of course, oaks are great, hickories are great, walnuts are great. I see a lot of birds hanging out in and around my redbud tree, in part because of the insects there, and especially native plants and insects. I know I mentioned this earlier, but an oak tree can have hundreds or even a couple thousand different species of unique beneficial insects, and what that equals for us is free bird food. So that's a really great way to get them in as well. Also, I would love to have more pines in my community because a lot of the birds will take the seeds that they have at this time of year. If you see them visiting your feeder and just hitting it nonstop but flying away right away, what they're doing is called caching. And they're looking for trees like hickories and pine trees that have really thick bark, and they're taking the seeds and they're shoving it up inside the bark of the tree to store it for a rainy day. And chickadees in particular are really amazing. This time of year, their brains, the part of their brain that's responsible for memory is growing because they have to remember where all of those hundreds of little seeds are hidden. So if you have anything you can do to help them out with that too, it's a great way to keep them coming back and keep them happy. So that kind of brings me to the end of everything that I wanted to talk to you all about. Do y'all have any other questions about getting your yard winter ready or about birds in general? I'm willing to field just about any questions, yes.
So this isn't about winter, it's more about spring,
Mhm.
but we have robins, blue jays, the normal things.
Mhm.
Is there anything we can do for a bird that builds a nest around the house somewhere to help them keep their eggs safe? Because we have egg thieves, but we don't know.
You don't know who they are?
We don't know who the thieves are.
It's a little bit harder for birds that don't nest in like a tree cavity or nest box. It depends on who's taking them. Because if it's if it's like a cat or a raccoon, then you might be able to put a baffle on something to keep them away. If it's something like a snake, it's a little bit harder.
We had just in a hanging planter,
Mhm.
actually on the front porch, we had a robin build a beautiful nest and about 4 eggs, and somebody stole them in the night or something. I don't know, the next morning they were gone, and that would be, what, like a snake? Or?
That would be my best guess, would be a snake. And, to keep them away, there's not really much you can do, because for that, maybe one of the best things you could do would be to find something that has spikes coming out of it and put it above. But of course, a rat snake, they can be 6 feet long. So if it can still get at it from the side, it might be harder. I will say to everyone, I've seen this kind of bouncing around on various web forums and stuff, people suggesting mothballs to keep snakes away. Mothballs do not help. The snakes they can't smell the mothballs, it doesn't affect them. It's really only an insecticide, and it's actually illegal to use it in settings outside of its intended purpose. So you would actually be doing more harm than good to the birds in the area if you put the mothballs outside or in your birdhouse or anything. So just a little bit of fair warning on that one. Otherwise, yeah, say something with spikes might be the best way to keep them away. That'd probably be the best thing that would still allow mom and dad to get in.
Would squirrels steal eggs?
Squirrels aren't as much of egg thieves. Raccoons, on the other hand, they tend to eat more eggs. The gray squirrels, at least around here, their diet tends to be almost entirely plant-based. That's why, like, I don't mind leaving a feeder out with just mealworms, because the squirrels don't really bother the mealworms either. I want to think more about that situation, because that's just my first thoughts on that. But now I want to learn more. So if you come into the shop in a couple months, I'll have a better answer for you.
Just like she did, I had a bird nest in a fern on my front porch. I was afraid to water the plant.
Yeah, it's something you could try doing if you wanted to, like if you were worried about that next year, is you can get those those nice little glass bulbs that are filled with water. You can put those in there, and then, so the parent birds, as long as you're just going, grabbing, walking, and putting it back, that shouldn't affect them too much. It's actually a myth that if you touch a nest or the eggs, mom and dad will leave the babies alone, leave them. So that would probably be the best way to keep the water in your plants without affecting the nest, because that'll get the water deeper down into the soil. I would just shove it in there as far as it can go, so it can hit the bottom of the roots, and that should hopefully help keep the top dry enough for mom and babies.
I had 4 babies.
They're so cute. Yeah. And I know robins, and especially the house finches and the house wrens and the Carolina wrens, those tend to be 4 of the really big species that really like to kind of take over those weird little random places like wreaths and ferns and
Yeah.
any of those tiny little places. They're like, oh look, free real estate. Yeah, those would probably be my suggestion for helping keep your plants watered. Or if you also have one of those ones that has the watering spots at the bottom too. So what other questions does everybody have?
I know you kind of said this earlier, but I've had 2 robin nests, and I was just wondering, is there a special food that's while they're nesting?
That's a great question. So for Wild Birds Unlimited, we have 2 seasonally appropriate blends. Right now, we've just barely brought out our Winter Super Blend, which has those bark butter bits. It has peanuts, sunflowers, all kind of the really, really big bulky foods for the winter time. And then in the springtime, we have a nesting super blend. And the nesting super blend is made up 40% of mealworms, which during the springtime, even a lot of our birds that we think of as normally just eating seeds switch to a much more insect-based diet, both for themselves and for their young. So you could offer a blend with mealworms. For robins, they tend to like a lot of the same foods as bluebirds because they're closely related. So mealworms, suet, fruit, peanuts, sunflower. At the shop, there's a blend called the Bluebird Bugberry Blend that has all of those things in it. And with robins, they like to have kind of a more tray style, close to the ground, because think about where they spend most of their time searching for their food. The difference between attracting bluebirds and attracting robins is more about where you put the food rather than what you put out. And then also just making sure that in the springtime especially, just let the bugs have your yard for a bit. Don't spray any pesticides or anything, because that more than anything is going to be helpful, because even when they're relying on us the most, that's still usually maybe 20 to 40% of their diet comes from our bird feeders. The rest of that is from the wild food in the area. So by doing that and make sure that they have access to water, that's going to give them the best chance possible.
I have one more question. You said leave the leaves. What if I mulch the leaves?
If you mulch the leaves, that'll keep the nutrients and such in the soil, but it might kill off the insects that are in there. It's still better than completely removing them. It's not perfect, but are any of us perfect? So, each individual person knows their yard situation and knows what they can do.
Okay, thank you, Lauren,
Yeah.
for coming and giving us
Thank you.
And next month, I handed out the next flyer for next month. We will be having a representative from the Museum of Native American History. It's in Bentonville, and I don't know if any of you guys have gone to visit it yet, but the director will be here on Tuesday, November 12th. So you're invited to come. We'll have drinks and dessert, bring your lunch, and hopefully we'll see you then. So, thank you for coming.